my gosh, I want to read that book. Well, I already have, because guess what? Rebel News is publishing that book, Unsporting, co-authored by Linda Blade and Barbara Kay. And they join me now via Skype. Linda Blade in Edmonton and Barbara in Montreal. Linda, congratulations. Is this your first book?
Well, yes, it is my first book, other than the PhD thesis I wrote long ago and a little manual on coaching. But this is definitely my first book.
I'm thrilled. I mean, you couldn't have picked a spicier topic. This subject, I want to let you know, this subject is the most censored subject in all of social media. More than critical comments about radical Islam, more than anything about Donald Trump. If you take on transgenderism in sport, your books will be banned, your accounts will be banned. Why would you be motivated to write a book about such a controversial subject? Maybe it has something to do with your history as a leader of women's sport.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been an athlete, I've been a coach, and now I'm president of Athletics Alberta, and I'm in charge of sport policy. And it's just a silly issue. I mean, we all know that there's a difference between males and females in sports. I mean, it's just so simple. I can't really believe it's so controversial, actually.
Well, I mean, it is extremely controversial. Even calling men who transition into women, even calling them men, that's called misgendering now. And using the names their parents gave them, that's called dead naming now. Those are things, just misgendering a trans athlete is enough to get you banned, in trouble, I don't know, fired from your job sometimes.
But there's the catch there, because even in Canada, when they introduced Bill C-16, they explicitly stated that there's a difference between biological sex and gender identity. And so I can always express my terms in biological terms, because that's recognized under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'm not misgendering because I'm not calling them like a man. I'm saying they're male. They're male. They're biologically male, and they can maybe identify as a woman. I could recognize their right to do that in society. But in sport, we compete on the basis of biology. So for me, the gender identity, gender expression, it's just one of your identities, just like your religion, your politics. We don't pick our athletes on that basis.
Huh. Well, J.K. Rowling, I think, took the same position you did, and she was practically fired by her own publisher. I promise you won't be fired by your publisher, Rebel News. Barbara Kane, you have been one of the bravest Canadian columnists. Very, very few columnists in Canada even dare talk about this. I find it remarkable that you're still allowed to talk about this subject in the National Post, and I give them credit for that. I'm so glad you teamed up with Linda Blade. How did the two of you get to know each other?
I think the first time we got together on this was when Linda published or wanted to publish an op-ed in the Post Millennial, and I helped her sort of craft it to be a little more punchy and more on the op-ed style, and we went back and forth, and I was just so impressed with what she had to say. And at that time, Ezra, you and I had been chatting about some of your books and how well they're doing. And I said, you know, I think this coach, Linda Blade, first of all, she was the only coach in Canada, still is, I think, who was speaking out on this topic. And I thought, it's one thing for a columnist like me, I write on a lot of topics, to speak out. I don't consider it courageous. I just think it's common sense. But for someone who is in the athletic world, for someone who is a stakeholder in the athletic world to speak out, it seems to be you need far more courage than I would need. And Coach Linda Blade was doing it, unsupported by other coaches and other associations. She, you know, her Alberta Athletic Association supports her in it. So she's in a position where she's not going to be fired because her people in Alberta have common sense. And I thought, man, I can't write this book because I don't have the authority or the credibility. But here's somebody who's not only a coach, but she's a former fantastic athlete who coaches high performance, Olympic level performance athletes herself, who has a PhD in biology, so knows what she's talking about as a scientist. She's got it all. And I thought, I can see that she's a quick study, because when we were working together on her op-ed, she learned in about 10 minutes. It
Yeah.
was, I didn't really have to help her very much. She got it. And I just said to you, Ezra, I said, I think I have somebody who should be writing a book on this very hot topic. And you kindly said, well, if you recommend her, go for it. So I said, Linda, you got to write this book, and I'll be happy to help.
Well, let me tell you, I have read this manuscript very carefully. In fact, I was a small part of the editing process. And so I wanted to know exactly what we were getting into, because we're not afraid of controversy at Rebel News, but I wanted to know the tone and the style. And I was very impressed. Let me just tell you what I like about the book. It is not a mean book. It's not antagonistic. It's not hateful or anything like that. There's a kindness to it. And I would say it's a pro-girls book. There's no antipathy towards anyone with their own gender issues or identity. It's just, what about the safety of girls, and what about the notion of fair play? I like the title of the book, Unsporting. I don't know, it was more scientific than I thought it would be. It was more facts, not just feelings, than I thought it would be. But I left, after reading the book, I thought, well, this is an absolutely compelling case against allowing male to female trans in girls' sports. But I didn't feel like like at the end of it, like it was mean or an attack. I felt like it was, wake up, folks, realize what you're doing. I don't know, that's how I felt. You approached it with a certain kindness, Coach Blade. Tell me a little bit about your own interactions with trans athletes.
Well, Ezra, I haven't had many. I've had a few conversations with some. But, the fact remains that I really want everybody involved in sports. That's our job. Our job is to try to help everybody in and have a good competitive experience. And we're not excluding anybody. If we say there's one category that's restricted to this certain kind of person, and then other people can go into these other categories, that's not excluding anybody. That's just recognizing the level playing field. So I never felt like it was anything against anybody. It was simply to reassert the biology-based, sex-based boundaries. And that's really our right. Again, it's our right. So I think we can balance this thing. And there are solutions offered in the book. So I was really looking for a way that the politicians and the bureaucrats and sport, everybody can get on the same page. We can recognize and honor and respect everybody's identity, but we can also play fair play. And that's really the goal here.
Yeah. The book is called Unsporting: How Trans Activism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport. You can get the book on Amazon, or we've set up a special website, Unsporting.com. I love that title, Unsporting.com. Now, Barbara, I know that this topic has felled giants. Like, I'm talking about people at the highest heights of celebrity in the sports world, in the literary world. I mentioned J.K. Rowling, even Martina Navratilova. We've seen Amazon yank other books. When I was reading this manuscript, I was in the back of my mind thinking, what would Amazon say? Not that we would cut things out or comply with them. I was just thinking, okay, is there going to be a fight? There's nothing in this book that's, quote, hateful. There's nothing in this book that's misinformation or disinformation. But that won't stop people for targeting it. And I want to tell you that we are resolute here at Rebel News. We'll stand by this book no matter what. My own book, China Virus, was censored for about a week by Amazon, but finally they relented. I don't want this book banned, but I think it will be almost immediately pounced on by people who professionally take offense. What do you think?
Well, I think it's considering what's happened to other books that have dealt with the whole trans issue at all, that's been our fear and almost an expectation, although I don't want to jinx it. And it would be a shame because, as you say, we're not angry at anybody. We're not fighting. We want everybody to live and let live is our motto. But you can't be both inclusive and exclusive at the same time. And in this particular, there's only a few realms in which the inclusivity of people who identify as the opposite sex becomes exclusionary of women if it's followed through on. One of them is prisons, for example. I've written about male bodies in women's prisons. It's a disaster. Or in locker rooms, or in women's private spaces where they fear for their own security and safety. So it is a big safety issue. World Rugby finally put a stop to male players in the women's side because it was becoming a safety issue, and there were actual injuries, and so you can't when rights collide, and sometimes they do. I think you have to look at fairness and safety, and if you do, then you have to say this is where the line is. This is where we draw the boundary. It's not to say that men who identify as women can't compete. They can compete in the male division, or we could have an open division. There are ways to fix this, but the way to fix it is not to spoil it for women, but to make it appropriate for everybody.
Yeah. Linda, the idea of women in sport, it's a pretty recent idea, frankly. I mean, for the longest time, professional sports was just a male thing. I mean, it wasn't until less than a century ago that the Boston Marathon even allowed women to run. I mean, there's these iconic photos of police trying to grab a woman who's running the Boston Marathon and pull her out. How dare you? So, I mean, we've lived through the golden age of women in sport, and it's almost the only age of women in sport. And we all see images of a male to female trans athlete standing, hulking above two biological women or girls on a podium. And there's a feeling of unfairness there. But I know that the upcoming Olympics, there's going to be trans athletes there. When it's no longer just one unusual trans athlete who wins, and then the girls who are in second and third, but when all three of the first, second, and third gold, silver, bronze podia have a trans athlete, I think then we'll realize that what we're actually doing is bringing to a close the golden age of women and girls in sport. And as a dad, I should tell you that's an absolutely terrible thing to have sports cut off for women and girls going forward. I think that's really where we are right now if this continues.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Ezra. I totally agree with you. We have had a wonderful century of women in sport. And it's taken a long time for all of us to climb up. You know, for example, when the Olympics first started, maybe they had one or two sports where women could compete in. And then by 1928, you know, the track and field started up. And then by 1984, finally, they let women do the marathon. And so we've been slowly accumulating events to reach parity. I'm not saying equality, parity. So whatever events the men do, the women have their version of it. And so the minute we get to, it's just ironic that the minute that we get to the point in history where we finally reach parity, where the same number of athletes, same number of events and sports for men and women, all of a sudden, the International Olympic Committee changes the rule and allows male bodies to self-identify into women's sports. And it just seems absurd to me. And you're right, it is going to ruin sports. It's going to ruin not only women's sports, and this is what I argue in the book, it's going to ruin a lot of grassroots sports, because a lot of our, you know, for boys and girls, a lot of our volunteers are parents and women and people who might feel uncomfortable or feel like they're going to be charged with hate if they don't go down some path they don't agree with. And I think this is very disruptive to the world of sport. And I just really worry, especially for young girls, because females really benefit. Young women benefit so much from sport. I mean, all kinds of data out there to show that if high school girls are involved in sport, they have higher grades, they're less likely to get pregnant, they actually are more likely to graduate. And then once they do graduate, most of the CEOs, like females who get to the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies, all have had sports in their background. It's very important for the self-confidence and understanding how to even lose properly as a woman. Like, It's not only about winning, it's about learning how to compete in the economy, in your job, in your life, and to stand up and take responsibility for yourself. And that knowing that when you do that, the playing field will be level and fair, but you have to do your part to fight hard. But if we take that lesson away from young girls, we don't have those opportunities anymore. And I think not only will sports suffer, I think the broader society will suffer, and I think the economy will even suffer. I feel we won't have the kind of female leaders and women leaders that we want. And it's not only sports that does it, but sports is a way to get that, to get those skills and achieve that kind of confidence, so that women, we can have strong families, we can all move forward. And I think it's just a pity and a shame that we're throwing all this away for some nonsense. It just doesn't make sense. Like the rule itself does not make sense. And what you have to have when you have a scheme for developing a rule system, first comes safety, second comes fairness, and lastly comes inclusion. And it has to be like that, because we just cannot afford to be, like, even in contact sports, having all kinds of injuries with women running into a 220-pound male. We just can't do it.
Well, and we know this because in other sports, we separate people by weight class. I mean, you don't have a super heavyweight boxer picking on a featherweight boxer. That's not sport. You could call that inclusion, but it's not entertainment, and it's not fair, and it's not fun for anyone. And like you say, it's not even safe. Hey, Barbara, I got a question for you. It's a political question. For more than a generation now, political shorthand has said, you've got to win the soccer moms. That's a phrase that politicians use for moms who are involved in the community and are out in, take their sons or daughters out for sports, and you've got to reach them in a way that's a little bit different than, let's say, their husbands. They might have different issues. They might care more about, worry about their kids getting involved with drugs, as opposed to maybe the husband might be more concerned about taxes. I don't know. It's just political shorthand. Soccer moms, soccer moms, soccer moms, the gender gap. It's shorthand for things like neighborhood crime and needles in parks and schools. My point is, for a generation, politicians have at least said they care about soccer moms and what they think. And I'm literally thinking about a mom in soccer, which isn't particularly a high contact sport, although it can be. Put aside soccer moms, any other sports moms, hockey moms even. And this seems like an absolute political attack on mama bears who care about their kids and their community. And so my question to you, Barbara, is where are the opportunistic, pragmatic politicians on the left or the right, in the liberals or the conservatives or the New Democrats or the Democrats or the Republicans, saying, I'm not even getting into the wokeism here. I just know that 90% of normal, soccer moms are sympathetic to people with different identity issues, but they don't want their daughter smashed in a rugby match with a 220-pound guy. Why are politicians not grabbing this?
No, you're absolutely right, Ezra. It's very interesting. I think that when you speak to people and you talk about inclusion, in abstract, if you're talking about the theory or the abstract idea, oh yes, everybody should be included. It's when you start getting down to the nitty gritty. So then you're fine with, your 13-year-old daughter playing hockey against a 13 or 14-year-old male who's gone through or who's going through puberty and packing on muscle and bone and speed and power. You're fine with that. Oh, well, I think when it comes down to your own daughter, you recognize immediately. And if you see it actually happening in front of you, I guess you have to have a bit of an imagination. I can vividly imagine how awful it would be to, having learned to sport, a girl is good at what she does, and then to be intimidated on the ice or on the field by having a soccer ball, say, slammed into her at twice the speed that any girl can kick it at. That hurts, and that puts you off your game, and it puts you off your confidence. And it may mean that next year, you know what, I don't think I want to go out for soccer anymore, because you already know there's going to be one or maybe two people on the opposing team that you're afraid of, that you're literally, afraid to come into contact with. That's just not okay. It's just not okay. So as a mom, as a grandmom, I mean, I have a 15-year-old granddaughter who's a very serious hockey player, and she's terrific as a girl. She's a great female hockey player, but now she's 16. She couldn't compete against a 16-year-old boy hockey player. There's just, when she was 9, she was playing against boys, but the minute that puberty starts, the girls have to be on their own team and the boys have to be. That's just the way it is, and everybody understands the level of speed and size and weight and everything else goes up and aggression.
Yeah.
On the boys' side, it's a different sport. It's a different sport, and pragmatic people who are realists, they understand that. I think you're 100% right.
Well, it's not even
soccer
sport.
moms.
It's not even sport to see a 6-foot-something guy crush a petite girl. That's not sport. And that's why I think the title of the book, Unsporting, is so spot on. Well, listen, it's such a pleasure to talk with you two. I really enjoyed the book. I learned a lot from it. I didn't actually think I would. That's some arrogance on my part, but it was also ignorance. I just didn't know all the science and all the history and all the politics and the statistics in here. We've got graphs in the book. There's a ton of footnotes. I really feel like I benefited from this book. I'm really excited that we're publishing it. I promise you that we will lean into the hurricane if one comes. We will not allow this book to be deplatformed. And in fact, I don't want to give it away, but we learned a few things from when China virus was deplatformed. And I can promise you too that God forbid this book is deplatformed in its first distribution mode. We have an emergency backup ready, and I don't want to get into that because God willing, it'll proceed. I would like to speak to the viewers directly and say this. It's an excellent book. You should read it because it's an excellent book. It's interesting. It's timely. You're going to learn things you didn't know. I felt like I knew this issue before. I learned so much in it. But I think it is absolutely critically important. I'd even call it a sort of patriotic duty that if Coach Blade and Barbara Kay write this book and we publish it, we've got to support this because they are showing tremendous courage. Tell me another Canadian author or even an American author that's written a book like this. Tell me another publisher that would do it. So we have to show the world that just because the wokerati don't want this book published, don't want it read, doesn't mean we're going to comply. So if you go to unsporting.com, you can learn a little more about the book, see a little book trailer, and you can order it right there. And I hope you do. Because if we can get this book to be #1 on the Amazon.ca list, and I think that's a possible goal, not only that will be a wonderful signal to Linda and Barbara about how the book is being received by viewers, but it'll be a signal to the rest of the cowardly class that they don't need to be so afraid anymore. In fact, if they show a bit of courage and a bit of intellectual honesty, they might actually be rewarded by the public and by book viewers and book readers and book buyers. So please go to unsporting.com. Linda and Barbara, great to talk with you today. Congratulations on this book. Well done. And I hope you have great success with it, and we'll do our best.
Thank you so much, Ezra. Just great to be with you, and thank you for your tremendous support. It's true. I don't think we could have gotten published by anybody else in Canada. Well,
it's an outstanding book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you, Barbara, too. I mean, Barbara, you helped me all the way through this. So I'm not the writer. That's why I can write this book. I'm not a writer. I'm a coach. So
you're
I really
a writer
did need
now.
help.
No, you're a writer now. And I have to say, just as a final thing, what a great pleasure it was to work with Linda. I don't think we ever had a tense moment between us. We're both, it was about the book, not about ego, not about, so it was just from beginning to end, it was my COVID project, and made the time go fast, and I loved every minute of, made a new friend,
well,
a great friend.
You, me too.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it is my
Wonderful.
goal
Thank
that
you.
tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of Canadians read this book. I think the facts in it will change hearts and minds. It'll give people ammunition and arguments to fight back, and maybe will help move the culture just a little bit. So the book again is called Unsporting: How Transactivism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport. The new book, Unsporting, is probably the most controversial book we've ever published. It's about transgenderism pushing its way into women's sports. You'd better get it quickly because odds are this book is going to be banned. Go to unsporting.com right away.